Praise the Lord and welcome to Sunday Morning Christian Education. My name is Teraie Deloach. I attend Greater Bethlehem Temple Apostolic Church located on 4781 Hamilton Avenue in Cincinnati, Ohio, where Bishop James Chapman is the pastor and our First Lady is Lady Robin Chapman, and where we all proclaim that there is a God in Bethlehem and Jesus is his name. Today's lesson is called Healing on the Sabbath. And the lesson text comes from the book of Luke, chapter 6, verses 1 through 11. And the golden text reads, "And he said unto them, that the Son of Man is Lord, also on the Sabbath." And that's Luke, chapter 6, verse 5. Google says the Jewish Sabbath is a weekly day of rest or time of worship given in the Bible as the seventh day. It commemorates the original seventh day on which God rested after completing the creation. Jesus taught that the Sabbath day was made for our benefit. The purpose of the Sabbath is to give us a certain day of the week on which to direct our thoughts and our actions toward God. It is not a day merely to rest from work. It is a sacred day to be spent in worship and reverence. Our day is usually on Sunday, although you should be given some type of worship throughout every day because he is worthy. He deserves all the glory, the honor, the praise. He deserves all that. But the Jewish Sabbath day is on Saturday, to celebrate week in and week out the resurrection of Jesus. The Jewish Sabbath day begins at sundown on Friday and ends at sundown on Saturday. Our lesson says the religious leaders of Jesus' time had made the mistake of adding to God's law about the Sabbath in such a way that when God arrived in their midst, they accused him of being a lawbreaker. Jesus needed to correct their misconceptions about him and about the day that belonged to him in order to teach them how the Sabbath should be honored under the righteous rule of God and not of men. The Pharisees saw the Sabbath day as just another rule in the book. They followed it out of ritual and not of love for the God who gave it to them, because the Sabbath is a gift. God gave it to us so that we will not feel we have to work constantly. God gave us the law as a guide to show us how to live a life that leads to blessings. Jesus' public ministry quickly came under the scrutiny of the Pharisees, religious leaders of the day who probably felt threatened by this up-and-coming prophet and his growing band of followers. After Jesus had been baptized by John and tempted by Satan in the wilderness, he went to his hometown of Nazareth on the Sabbath day and proclaimed himself as the fulfillment of the key messianic prophecy. This certainly got the Pharisees' attention, and they began to resist Jesus. Luke indicates that all these things may have happened relatively quickly after Jesus began to teach and minister publicly. For lack of a better reason to dispute with Jesus, the Pharisees challenged him on small legalistic grounds. The great crime of which Jesus was accused was allowing his disciples to pick and eat some heads of grain from a field they happened to be passing through because they were hungry. They didn't have any food. Jewish law allows hungry travelers to help themselves to a reasonable amount of a neighbor's produce if needed, but the Pharisees took issue with Jesus for a different reason. The Pharisees objected to Jesus and his disciples' otherwise lawful behavior solely because it took place on the Sabbath day. What the disciples did wasn't qualified as labor. The Pharisees had added much harsher restrictions on the people than were originally found in the law of Moses. Apparently, part of this extra set of man-made rules was a prohibition against picking or separating any grain at all on the Sabbath. Jesus knew that violating this human standard did not offend God, who made the law. The Pharisees also recognized that by allowing Jesus' followers to break their rules, Jesus was challenging their authority. When they asked him why he allowed his disciples to do these things, they clearly suspected the answer already. Jesus did not respect their spiritual authority or their use of the law. This angered them and caused them to try to find fault with Jesus at any opportunity they could. They had a chance. Their question was probably meant to make Jesus give an answer that would allow them to discredit him publicly. Unfortunately for the Pharisees, Jesus' answer actually ended up discrediting them. Jesus was not intimidated, but instead answered their question with one of his own, as he often liked to do. This public display of their shallow understanding discredited their authority and demonstrated Jesus was above them as their teacher. This passage Jesus referenced in his answer harkened back to the authority of King David. His ancestor, Jesus, drew a parallel between himself and David. David and Jesus both led a group of people to do a mission, and there wasn't any food, and the people were hungry. So David's solution was to go to the tabernacle of the Lord and ask the priests there for bread. The priests did give them bread to eat, gave David and the men bread to eat. It was supposed to be the bread for the priests only, and it was consecrated before the Lord. It clearly broke the law regulation, but God never rebuked them for it. So perhaps the priest and David, a man after God's own heart, realized the law was meant to preserve God's people and that God was providing to preserve. Jesus used David's actions to explain his own. Jesus argued that if God allowed that, he certainly would allow his chosen servant to break the weak man-made rule and authority of the Pharisees. Jesus was not just another man, though his explanation for his actions went one giant step further. He claimed the title Son of Man, and his right to use the Sabbath as he pleased was not rooted in merely human authority, but in his divine sovereignty and justice. The Pharisees had two reasons for trying to bring Jesus down. First, he had made them look bad by discrediting their authority. Then he made matters much worse by claiming that the authority by which he did so was divine. So they looked for ways to trap Jesus in a lie or sin to get him out of their way. That never happened. The Pharisees stooped so low as to use a disabled person as a trap for Jesus. They placed a man in the synagogue where Jesus was teaching to see what he would do with the disabled man who had a withered hand. The trap was to see if Jesus, would heal the man on the Sabbath, or he would have done that on that day in the violation of law. If he would have done that, it would have been a violation of the law. If he refused to heal, though, Jesus would seem indifferent to the man's suffering, which they could use against him. So wow, what difference does it make? They was mad at him if he healed him, and they would be mad at him if he didn't heal him. They was confused. Now, how they thought they were going to trap Jesus, when Jesus knows all and sees all, he knew what they was about. He knew what they was thinking. He knew what they was plotting. I don't even see how they thought they could trap him. So, Jesus called the man to him, but first he asked a question. Was the Sabbath the rest day ordained by God? Is it lawful to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? The Pharisees clearly didn't understand God's will. They had used the Sabbath for destruction by setting up a disabled man for public shame. But what they meant for evil, God meant for good. In fact, their whole misguided attempt to trap Jesus by tricking him into healing someone revealed their misunderstandings of God's ways. Jesus called on the man with the withered hand to stretch it out. This man's hand was restored without Jesus even doing anything physically. He spoke the word. He didn't even have to touch the man. I want God to speak a word in my life. The Pharisees couldn't even do anything because they physically saw the man's hand being healed. So they didn't have any evidence to use against Jesus. We too should strive to do or settle things more wisely, or so that God would get the glory and then we would get blessed. Sadly, instead of rejoicing and believing in Jesus, this only made the Pharisees even more angry. They continued to conspire together about different ways to attack Jesus. I hope that you will learn to trust Jesus more, get to know him more, so that we can all do better, live better. And I hope I have put something on your mind. Until next time, God bless.